welcome back, everybody. Glad to be here again for episode 3 of the Hard Rock Book Report. Nothing but a good time, the uncensored history of the 80s hard rock explosion. And today, let's see, episode 1, we talked about how Dokken formed. Episode 2, yesterday, we talked a little bit about the 83 and 84 Bark at the Moon, Shout of the Devil tour, Ozzy and Motley Crue, how crazy that was. Today, as you can see, one of my favorite subjects of recent years, the whole mishmash, cross-pollination of the early 80s LA metal and hard rock scene with guitarists like George Lynch, Jake E, and Warren Demartini. What could be better? 3 of my favorite guys in the whole genre of music. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. That is chapter 16. Then I got the Ozzy gig, which I've talked about a little bit in previous videos. Some of the RATT album reviews I did, and the I think I talked about it briefly in the Tooth and Nail album review that I did. But we're going to talk about it again. And I still had a lot of questions. I had found a lot of answers when I had those conversations with you guys, but I still had a lot of questions, and most of those questions are right here, most of those answers. So that's what made me kind of feel like it was time to do this in a hurry. And let's get on with it. This is a pretty short chapter, but a really interesting one, at least to me. Hopefully you'll share that feeling, but here we go. All right. Chapter 16, then I got the gig. Then I got the Ozzy gig. Excuse me. All right, so Jake E. After I quit RATT, they were looking for another guitarist, and I recommended Warren, who was a friend from San Diego. He was 19, and he was a great player. And I remember he was thinking about going to college, but I called him and talked him into coming up to LA instead. I said, you can always go back to college if that's what you want to do. But right now, there's this thing happening up here, and I think you want to be a part of it. Warren Demartini. The deal was I had to move up to LA that day because there were RATT shows that weekend. And you know, canceling a show at that point in your band's career was just an impossibility. You just could not do it. That would never get you would never get another job. Jake E. I was living in an apartment with my girlfriend, and my girlfriend let Warren live with us for a month or so. Warren Demartini. I basically moved to LA with my equipment and the chords to Round and Round. So that's interesting. Warren had some part of that chord progression already when he got there. Jake E. And I was writing the riff to Bark at the Moon, which was originally for Rough Cut, the band I joined after RATT. Boy, that's fascinating to think about. Warren Demartini. Jake and we're both night owls. So, you know, a typical night at that time was us at 1 in the morning, sitting on the floor and leaning back against a couch that's got the stuffing coming out. And there's a black and white TV with stations going in and out, but we're not really watching it. And we're both playing unamplified guitar, just working on these 2 songs. Jake E. Then I got the Ozzy gig. Warren Demartini. One day, Jake said to me, oh, you'll never believe this, but I got a call from Ozzy's manager and I'm going to try out. And what was weird was that not long before that, I was on the phone with George Lynch. And he's like, yeah, man, I'm pretty sure I got the Ozzy gig. That was a strange thing because at that moment, I think I was probably the only person that knew what was going on, you know? Dana Strum. When I first found Randy for Ozzy, George Lynch was actually my second pick. And when Randy died in the plane crash in Florida, I was the person that held the auditions and brought Jake and George in. George Lynch. After Randy died, Ozzy had Brad Gillis from Night Ranger playing guitar for him for a little bit. And I left Dokken for a minute and toured with Ozzy. I never played on stage during a live show, but I would go up and play at sound checks and at rehearsals. They were grooming me, basically. Then we did rehearsals in Dallas for a week or two, and then I flew back to LA to do more rehearsals at SIR. And that's when they got Jake. Dana Strum. I was put in a bad position because I was told, Dana, we're going with this other guy. And I was like, but this guy quit his job. He's got his bags here. And then Jake had the gig. Jake E. George was there for my audition. And yeah, that sucked because I knew who he was. He was part of the scene. And after my audition, I'm packing up my gear and I'm by the exit door and nobody has said anything to me. So I just figured I didn't get the gig. And that's when Sharon Osbourne walked up to me and said, we think you're the guy. And then Ozzy walked up next to her and he said, do you want the fucking gig? Yeah, I do. And at that moment, George came over and stood next to us. And he says, hey guys, what's up? And Ozzy turns to him and goes, you lost it. It's his now. And he walks away. Then it's just me and George standing there looking at each other. It was just a very awkward moment. And whoever had this book from the library before me actually wrote, oh, damn, exclamation point. I second that thought. George Lynch, I gotta say, it was pretty cold-hearted and really hit me hard because I pretty much had nothing at the time. My wife and I had two little kids and we had an apartment. I was even working a side gig delivering liquor down in South Central. It was a dangerous job. And so when the Ozzy thing came along, we thought, this is it. This is really going to change our fortunes. Sharon. Everybody took it for granted that George Lynch would get the gig, but Ozzy wasn't like, oh my God, I have to have this George Lynch. This is the guy for me. It wasn't a done deal. And then came Jake E, and everybody was like, yeah, this is the one. Jake E came in and was just, he was phenomenal. Ozzy. George Lynch is an excellent guitar player, but Jake was a more tasty guitar player to me. Jake E. Lee. If you ask George, he'll say I got the gig because I had better hair. Sharon. Of course he had better hair. He had better everything than George. George Lynch. I think their big thing with me was that I had cut my hair short. I didn't have that big rock look. But hey, I could have worn a wig. Ozzy was bald at the time. And then the person who had this wrote, really? And underlined that part. And yes, if you don't remember, Ozzy was bald at the time. For whatever reason, he had shaved his head. At least, now, the period George is talking about, when he was touring with them, that was before the Bark at the Moon stuff, of course. That was some point during the Diary, the end of the Diary tour when like Speak of the Devil was done and all that. So yeah, for a while there, I remember seeing pictures in the magazines of Ozzy with his head shaved. Warren Demartini. That whole thing was a shocker because everyone that was hanging around in LA in that circle thought for sure George was going to be the next guitar player in Ozzy. George Lynch. The Ozzy thing happened over the course of what was probably a couple of months. And when that ran its course and didn't work out for me, I thought, okay, well. So one night I went to see the Dockin guys at the Whiskey. They were there hanging out or something. And I go, are we putting this thing back together? And they were like, well, we don't know, George. I remember even Mick saying that to me. What? Really? I think they actually had Warren in the band for a second. Wild Mick Brown. During that period when George was running around with Ozzy, we thought he was leaving. So we said, well, we've got to get somebody. And everybody was emulating George at the time. But then here comes Warren Demartini. I don't think he ever did a gig with us, but we had claimed him as the guy. Don Dokken. George had quit the band. And in this interim, I was going to do one more showcase for Elektra to try to get them to keep us on the label. Juan Crucier was on bass. I had met Warren Demartini. He was kind of in RATT, but RATT hadn't really made it. George Lynch. RATT and Dokken rehearsed in the same facility, and I think Warren came in and was jamming with them for a while. So I went over and started jamming with RATT. Warren Demartini. I rehearsed with Dokken once, maybe twice. Don. And in the middle of all this, Warren and Juan are playing with RATT at the same time. Everybody was kind of playing musical musicians, but Warren and Juan decided to go with RATT, and that was the end of it. George Lynch. At some point, Warren and I ran into each other in the hall, and I go, what are we doing? Why don't we just go back to our respective bands? So that's what we did. It was kind of funny. Wild Mick Brown. I remember looking at Warren one day and telling him, listen, dude, don't go with RATT. You'll never go anywhere with that band. They don't have any songs. When I hear myself say shit like that, Warren and I are still friends, and we laugh about it when we're drunk. Like, wow, how wrong can you be? And that's chapter 16. Nothing but a good time. Again, what a great book. Now, this is so interesting. This stuff is like, how else am I going to find all this out? I don't honestly know. I get little snippets here and there from different things on YouTube or stuff like that. But I mean, where else am I going to go? I'm not able to go buy, Rip and Hit Parader and Circus magazines today that are talking about these guys anymore. So I go to YouTube. It makes sense that people are still talking about them there just like I am. So it's the place you can go. Now, when a book like this comes out, and these are all directly from interviews with these guys, such a pleasure to read. I mean, it's just kind of no bullshit. This is what they remember. This is most likely the bulk of what happened. And if one guy's not remembering it right, you get another story from another guy who was also there, probably. It's just really cool. Okay. So I thought while I'm doing this, since these don't take very much time, I would go ahead and talk about these three guys and just kind of give you my favorite solo, my favorite guitar they played, my favorite album they were on. Okay, so let's start with Jake. All right, so Jake, I like Whitey. I like the white Charvel with the black pickguard. I mean, that's the one we saw him with the most. So I really like his blue Charvel too. But that white one just really stands out as different from what most of the other guys were playing. You didn't see a lot of pick guards in the 80s. So that's a cool guitar. My favorite album, Jake is on. I kind of had a hard time figuring that out, but I'm going to go with the Badlands debut album. I feel like that's the closest we ever got to how Jake really wants to play. I've heard a little bit of his Red Dragon Cartel stuff, not enough to move one of those albums up. If it belongs at the top, I don't know. Um, you can hear Jake a lot better on the Ultimate Sin Ozzy album, but I like Bark at the Moon better personally. Okay, so how about Mr. Lynch? All right, so my favorite guitar that I remember George playing was gosh, there's a lot of those, but believe it or not, it's not the Mr. Scary skull guitar. Probably because I actually play guitar sometimes, and that thing just looks uncomfortable and bulky as hell to me. Maybe not at all. It's really cool looking, but I think I like I think I like some of the tiger stripe guitars George has. But I'm pretty sure my favorite one has to be the tiger stripe one. It's like you got some orange, and then it winds up on the outside being that kind of a dark purple. That thing is just gorgeous. I also really like the one with the skull and the snake. Yeah, I think that tiger stripe one with the purple edge is my favorite. My favorite Lynch solo, well, man, that's got to be Tooth and Nail, right? Yeah. Although there's a lot of them. And my favorite album I've ever heard George play on. I mean, I really feel like the George Lynch that I cannot do without is the George Lynch on the Tooth and Nail album. That's my George. All right. And then last but definitely not least, my favorite player from the 80s, Mr. Demartini. Um, my favorite Warren guitar has got to be the Cross Swords guitar. I really love the skull with the blood splatter, but that Cross Sword guitar is definitely my favorite. I love the others. I love the Frenchie. I love the snakeskin. They're all great, but the Cross Swords, that's my thing. My favorite, my favorite solo. Wow, boy, that's tough. I'm going to say my favorite album, even though Warren played a higher percentage of the guitars on some of the later RATT albums. I definitely, I mean, Out of the Cellar, baby. You cannot top that album. You just can't. And gosh, my favorite Martini solo, it's it's a tie. It's a tie between Lay It Down and Back for More, my two favorite RATT songs. If I have to give one of them the edge, I'll go with Back for More just because it doesn't remind me of any other guitar solo I've ever heard in my life. It's just, it's so crazy, unique, and different. Such incredible style and personality in that solo. All right. So anyway, that's the end of the episode. And thanks again for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any more thoughts on this topic, I'd love to talk about that in the comments. It just kills me thinking of these guys all being right there together in those early 80s years and bouncing from band to band, replacing each other half the time. And I mean, wow, what a God, if I could have lived there and been just a little older in like 80, 81, 82, 83, to die for. All right. You guys have a good one. I will take a look through this and see if I can find any more chapters that simply must be talked about. I'm pretty sure there's a couple more coming. All right. Later.